Well, it seems like the internet is a huge accelerant. It speeds up everything. Maybe for both peace and war, it can also accelerate conflict.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Let's look at the next slide, if we could.
So this is a screenshot of a reciprocal site to Israel Loves Iran, and this is where the Iranians are reciprocating. So when Ronnie put up his page, within hours an Iranian put up a page saying, we don't want to go to war with you either. And it just speaks to how quickly people are able to respond.
So there are some grassroots activities.
Absolutely.
There are plenty of people in Iran and Israel who really don't want to go to war with each other, but there's still that small percentage that controls all the weaponry that looks like they're heading toward a showdown, perhaps. So it's interesting whether enough grassroots pressure can change the power dynamics in this equation.
And it remains to be seen. So we look at these efforts as prototypes and people experimenting with the medium and seeing what the potential is. And again, with Facebook, one of the things that we find particularly interesting are all the insights. So for instance, on this campaign, we have access as page administrators, so we can look at all the data. So when Ronnie and his associates post something, we can see how much engagement there is. You know, how many times is this image shared, commented on, reposted, viewed? You know, we can look at the statistics based on country and city and demographics, you know, men, women, breakdown in ages, and so on. So you have a really precise lens, so they can continue to experiment at no cost and just iterate until they find the method that works.
The right message, maybe.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's look at the next slide.
Now, this is a campaign called Romancing the Border, and this is...
I can't quite read the lettering on the shirts, but I think one of the shirts says Pakistan, and I think the other one says India.
That's right. So Romancing the Border is a program to reduce tension along the Pakistan-India border. And this was started by a college student, and his name is Rehman Ilyas. And so he started this slightly before Ronnie started his campaign between Israel and Iran. And actually the conflict between India and Pakistan in some ways is more tense. It's larger populations, and they're both nuclear powers.
Well, some conflicts are caused by very ambitious leaders, but I think some conflicts are also grassroots conflicts where there are two peoples like India and Pakistan. It doesn't just sound like it's megalomaniacal leaders. It sounds like these whole groups of people really see themselves as enemies of each other.
There are usually a lot of inputs into any one conflict, a lot of what we would call antecedents, and it's interesting to sort of separate those out and then design an intervention to target one of them. One of the things that Rehman realized is he went to university in Hong Kong, and suddenly, for the first time in his life as a Pakistani, was in the same class with a bunch of students from India, and suddenly realized, wow, as soon as we get outside of our context in our own countries, we're very like each other. We're great friends, and we gravitate towards each other. Why can't we be like that in the rest of the world? And so he, I think, wisely bit off a small slice of the big problem and said, maybe I can do something about student relationships, starting there, and so working with young people, which I think is probably a wise approach, because like most conflicts, they're tangled, they're complicated, there are a lot of issues, and anybody who wants to work on them should probably pick one part and get good at that one bit.
Okay, I think we have one more slide. Can we see that last slide, please? So this is a group picture, Margarita. I think that's you in the center right with the blue sweater.
Right, yeah. This was taken a year ago. We were invited to present our work at the NATO PSYOPs conference in Orlando. And it was fascinating to spend 3 days with these military officers who focus on psychological operations and having a conversation with them about social media, because in some ways they're limited in what they can do. When I was at the Aspen Institute this summer for the first dialogue on technology and diplomacy, and sitting around with people like Madeleine Albright and others talking about what happened in the Arab Spring and why couldn't anyone predict it? You know, so you have all this intelligence on the ground, why didn't they see it coming? And part of it is because they weren't listening to where the conversation was really happening. They were, you were bureaucrats talking to bureaucrats. And if they had been hanging out sort of like at the local watering hole, what are youth talking about on Facebook, they might have had more of an inkling of what was going on.
I think there's also a lot of repressed anger in the world. People have been swallowing their anger maybe for centuries because they didn't really have a way to release it. And now things like Facebook kind of enable it to come to the surface, which may or may not be a healthy thing. Like if all these long repressed angers suddenly were released, would we be better off? Would that be a more peaceful world?
Well, the interesting thing about what happened in the Arab Spring was that collectively people realized that they had a shared grievance. And in Tunisia, I think the data on Facebook was that like something on the order of 80% of the population was on Facebook by the time it sparked. And it was this collective realization that everyone was unhappy. And prior to that, without having that access, they're going like, well, something feels wrong, but I think it's just me, and no one else feels this. And once they did, then they realized that they had the ability and the momentum to change it. But when we look at the aspirations of the people in the Middle East, the population is very young. Over half the population is under 35, and they are looking for a path to have a better life. And so places like Facebook allow them to express that. So I spend a lot of time looking at Facebook and what people do there. And I have a ton of Pakistani friends because of Romancing the Border, so they friend me and I connect with them because I'm curious to see what they care about. And their goals are like ours. They're aspirational. The things that they post are, friends, family, inspiration, all the things that we care about.
Well, if people want all these good things, what is really driving all the conflicts in the world? Because it's obvious that there's an enormous amount of momentum behind conflict, probably a lot more momentum than there is behind any possible peace efforts going on. And what do you think are the driving forces that keep the pot boiling in so many places all the time?
Actually, I think that assumption is incorrect when you look at the data. It turns out, and Steven Pinker at Harvard has done really great work on this to show that we're actually living at the most peaceful time in history by a long
Really? Because you look at places like Syria and other places?
Indeed, and that's the kind of stuff that makes the media. And what you don't see is all of the international trade, all of the mutually positive, mutually beneficial relations that are happening across all these different conflict boundaries. Nobody ever, again, is presenting the conflict in the context of and how much peaceful, mutually beneficial, positive, pro-social exchange is also going on.
Well, how do we actually define peace? Is peace merely the absence of violence, or is it something else? Because there are countries where internally they're at peace, but that doesn't mean that people don't live in fear.
Yeah.
They might be peaceful because they're afraid of what will happen to them if they do something unpeaceful.
Right. So I should first be very straightforward that there are a lot of good definitions of peace out there, and the definition that we use, we're not going to make any claim that it's the right definition or the best definition. We're just going to say it's the definition best suited to our tools. So we look at peace in terms of measurable positive engagement across a difference boundary of some kind. So we would look at culture or ethnicity or language or religion or any social difference that has typically and traditionally blown up into a violent conflict and say, can we use technology to elicit measurable, positive, pro-social, mutually beneficial behavior across that line? So we don't think of peace so much as, well, there are three categories actually that we look at. One is when there is conflict, can we measurably reduce it? That one's important, but we're not nearly as focused on that one now as we used to be. Because it turns out that that's largely remedial. That's largely about fixing things that are already broken. It's important work. A lot of other people doing good work in that space already. The next category above that is really interesting. Because getting people to reduce violence implies that peace is actually just people ignoring each other. And we don't think that's the case at all.
Now, do you think that peace is the default condition of mankind? The normal state is peace, and war is an aberration resulting mostly from understandings? I mean, some people would say that the normal condition of mankind is war, because everybody wants to dominate their neighbor and not be dominated by them, and everybody covets things that they cannot get through peaceful methods. They can only get by taking them by force from somebody else. So which is the norm, really?